Yeah, the self-ownership is so
Right.
powerful, right? Often when we're feeling depleted or depressed, what happens is that we lose hope. And sometimes that's because we feel like there's nothing that we can do. And sometimes that can mean not only looking externally for that validation, but also sort of giving away our power, right? And part of taking that power back is actually owning all the things that we've been
Mm,
doing, how we've been living up until the point that
right.
led us there, right? Because any moment that we're blaming anyone else outside of ourselves, we're also giving away our power to that
Hmm.
person or that experience or that industry, because when we're blaming, then we're not focusing on things that we can control. And when we focus on what we can control, what's within our control, which is our mindset, how we're approaching things, our perception of things, and our response and how we're choosing to live our life, who we are, that's what causes the deep fundamental transformation that is so powerful, that I experienced personally and that I love to help my clients with now, because this is what gets to the core. This is what gets to the root of so many challenges, right? And that manifests on a mental, emotional, and
Mm.
also physical plane. That once you get to this root and you can make those shifts there, everything unfolds seemingly magically.
Hello, and welcome to the Generate Your Value podcast. I'm your co host, Andy McDowell, founder and owner of Generate Your Value, providing self leadership, leadership, and business coaching services for corporate executives and business owners.
And I'm Zach Levy, your other co-host. I run a nationwide financial service business with my wife, Megan.
Together, Zach and I have the intention to bring you tips, concepts, ideas, suggestions, stories, and analogies from A to Z, which will help you to grow your personal brand and leadership skills in such a way that joy, happiness, and success, as you define it for yourself, are achieved.
We hope to use our gifts, talents, and experiences in business and leadership to generate value in your life. And with that being said, let's move to our topic for today.
Hello, and welcome to the Generate Your Value podcast. My name is Andy McDowell, your host for today, coming to you from the city of Atlanta, Georgia, and something that people don't associate Atlanta with. You know, we associate with Coca-Cola and hospitality of the South and the mega center of college football and all that kind of things. But if you're ever on an airplane landing at the airport in Atlanta, look out the window, because what most people don't understand is how much Atlanta is in the city of trees. Yes, look out the
Mm.
window, look at the canopy of trees that you see around. Now, Andy, why are you bringing this up? Well, you may hear it in my voice, but I'm very nasally today because we in Atlanta, we're recording this in late March, have started what we call yellow season. Andy, what is yellow season? Well, a lot of those trees you see in the canopy in Atlanta are southern pines. And they're notorious for having a pollen that's extremely large and you can easily see, and it covers everything. And Atlantans hate it because by the middle of April, everybody's car is yellow, not brown or red or green or whatever, black. It's yellow because it covers everything. And so if you're going, Andy, you sound a little nasally today, that's the reason why. So it's probably not a strange thing that my guest today, the universe has a sense of humor, is a doctor. And he's bringing up allergies on the episode today. So it's probably not a surprise that, my guest today is a doctor. And her name is Dr. Lisa Yeung. Uh, we've known each other for probably about a year, a little more. I've had some great conversations because we're cut from the same cloth. And I think after 45, 50 minutes of conversation, you'll understand why. Because they're both technical in nature. We both are tackling the same problem, but we come at it from a slightly different angle because we're on different sides of science. So you may see that coming out of the conversation. But let me read her bio, and then we'll bring in Dr. Lisa, get to know her a little bit as a person, and then we'll dive into some, since you're probably here for leadership conversation. What do you think we're going to go? What rabbit hole we're going to go down this afternoon? All right, here we go. Dr. Lisa Yeung is a physician and medical director turned integrative coach, TEDx and keynote speaker whose unconventional path has been shaped by her personal journey of self discovery and healing from burnout and depression. The wisdom, skills, and experience gained from her personal transformation allowed her to more powerfully and effectively serve as one of the nation's youngest medical directors on the front lines of the COVID-19 pandemic. Feeling called to do more after this experience, Lisa left conventional medicine to make an even bigger difference in the world. Now, Lisa uses her unique skill set and expertise to help leaders and organizations all over the world through her speaking, training programs, and her coaching. Her innovative approach integrates medical and complementary modalities and bridges scientific and spiritual worlds to get to the root of challenges keeping people stuck and preventing them from achieving their greatest potential. And so I challenge you, the listener, to think, oh, gee, I wonder what Dr. Lisa and Andy are going to talk about after reading that sentence, right? If you've been here long enough, you know where my passions lie. Lisa's proprietary frameworks and approaches have helped countless leaders step into their truest selves and highest purpose, enabling them to live their best lives and leave a lasting impact on the world. So, with that bio being read, Dr. Lisa, thank you so much for taking that valuable resource that's limited, called time, to come spend it with myself and our community.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to see how this unfolds and
Where we
where we
go
go
with
with
this.
this.
So, as I told you in the green room, my first question is always, you know, create this 5-10 minutes worth of space, if you will, to let you pick a spot on your timeline of your life from when you were born to where you are today, and help fill in the gaps of that bio with your life journey and what it's been like for you so far.
Mm. So, in terms of self leadership, one of the most powerful and pivotal moments in my life, as I'm sure many of us who are on this journey would say as well, is my equivalent of rock bottom.
Mm-hmm.
And so my rock bottom was unfolded, well, as always, in a completely unexpected way that it was a curveball out of nowhere that I never could have anticipated, especially Chinese immigrant, daughter of Chinese immigrants, so
Mm-hmm.
first generation, um, and growing up poor, working in the restaurant and all these things, and had a very certain mindset that, and set of beliefs really in terms of how I approached my life, right? Checking off these boxes that I'm told this is what you do to be a successful person. This is what you do to have success in your life, right? And you and I were just talking about what is our definition of success. So often, especially when we're little kids, we don't have the space even to be able to reflect on that. And so we often take on what we learn from our
Mm-hmm.
environment. And so with that mentality, with that work hard, push harder, study hard, achieve and check off those boxes mentality, essentially what happened is that I excelled in school. I got into medical school early, right? I knew very early on I wanted to help people. And the most obvious choice at the time was
Mm-hmm.
to become a doctor. I didn't know any other options really. And especially with Chinese immigrant parents, that was also
Yeah,
their dream
eh,
because I was afraid to go to
having spent a
college.
lot of time in China in my Boeing days and knowing not everything, but a good bit about the culture, the whole save face, the how and what you do reflects a lot on the family, and that's extremely important in the culture within China. One of the things I did a lot of consulting with was air traffic control within China, and they had a number of issues from a safety perspective because errors weren't self-reported because of that whole save face, present the best
Yeah,
that you can mindset within the culture in China. Um, it wasn't a good thing to self-report any errors and look for ways to improve processes or things of that nature. So I I understand a bit about what you're saying here. Even though you were in the United States, the Chinese culture was being brought with your parents into the United States. So I imagine
yeah,
that was a lot of conversation around the dinner table about what you were going to do with your life.
yeah. And the story that you just shared, right? When we value and prioritize conformity to other people's expectations, societal, cultural,
Mm-hmm.
religious, family, whatever it may be, that's when we start to lose
Yep.
sight of ourselves. And it becomes that much more challenging to really self
Mm-hmm.
lead, right, in a
Right.
powerful way. And so because we are measuring ourselves, our self worth, our value, our identity by all of these things that are external to us. And not ever often that intuition, that truth inside of us gets muffled and
Mm-hmm.
even muted completely. And we lose sight of that. And we just continue marching on this path that we think that we're told is supposed to work. It should be what we're supposed to be doing versus what we're meant to be doing. And so looking back now, I can see that. And when we're in it, it's so hard to see, right? And so for me, what happened is that I learned very quickly. I worked hard, achieved very highly, got into medical school, and then in residency, the short version of the story is that essentially I started residency off in crutches. I didn't know what was going on, but I had swelling in my knee. And one thing led to another. And eventually I was diagnosed with an incredibly rare medical
Mm.
condition myself. What was literally one in a million. So 1.8 cases per million in the world, meaning there's very little data, very little evidence. And all of a sudden, I, who was a doctor, already an MD, supposed to be taking care of other people, also with a background in clinical psychology, now I'm a
Yeah.
patient, right? Walking hospitals with no known cure and trying to figure out what to do. Talk about an identity like disrupt. And honestly, at that time, I still hadn't learned, right? We joke that doctors are the worst patients, but it's so true because actually, this goes back to self leadership, right? When we are taught to prioritize everything and everyone else
Mm-hmm.
first because we're wanting to help and wanting to serve, which always comes from a good place. But if we're not leading and taking care of ourselves first and foremost, then that is a disservice to everyone
Yep.
involved, right? And the less impact and the less we're able to actually serve. And so what happened is at the time, I still hadn't learned the lesson yet. And I was stretching myself thinner and thinner. I'm sure the viewers can relate, right? When there's a lot going on, we don't typically, many of us high achievers don't think to ask for help or support or take time off. Instead, we're like, well, we'll sleep a little less or we'll skip lunch and we'll go to this and do that. And so that's exactly what I did. And I tried to figure out my own healthcare and what I was going to do to treat myself first during lunch and during all these different moments and skip and just stretch myself thinner and thinner. And then when it rains and pours, right? And so all these different things in my life felt like it started to fall apart. And I really was getting this lesson very loudly, to the point where I eventually was so depleted and burned out and depressed that I
Yeah.
couldn't get out of bed. That's how extreme it got, because I see it with so many of the clients I work with, the people that I work with, right? Especially those that are the highest achieving, the most successful, we can handle a lot. And just because we can doesn't mean that we
Yeah.
should.
My journey was the same. I'm on a self esteem journey with my life, right? It was all about people pleasing for me. My young age, as my listeners well know, so I talk about it quite a bit, that, yeah, it was all about everybody else, about all looking outside. But the motivation behind it was people pleasing in hopes that you would like me, per se, and fill me up with love because of
Right.
that friendship or love that I was seeking all the time. And I would do anything to help you with that, as opposed to self leadership and finding that for myself and self love. Right. So that's always a problem, whether it's your profession or self esteem issues or whatever. If it's always outwardly focused, self care goes by the wayside, and then we end up in a ditch, all burnt out and everything else. Our journeys may be slightly different, but we all end up in that same ditch, right?
Well, we can only lead ourselves, just as we can only love ourselves or care for ourselves. We can only lead other people, right? The quality to which we can lead other people and love other people and care for other people is directly related to how we are able to
Yep.
do so for
When we're
ourselves.
doing it the right way. Yep.
Yes.
So you found yourself depressed, uh, in the ditch. How'd you get yourself out? What happened?
So I was so depleted and burned out running the program that I've been running for
Yep.
30 years, right? That I was supposed to live my life, that I I couldn't get out of bed. And at that point, for any of us who have experienced that before, you basically have one of two choices, right? You either
Hmm.
completely give up altogether, or you start to seek another way, start to realize there must be another way that's better than what I've learned, what I've experienced. And up until that point, that I didn't have the resources at my
Hmm.
disposal that I do now, right? In terms of even the people, the environment. Our environment is so important in terms of how it shapes us and how what we take on from the environment, whether it be people, places, or even technology, right? All of it different types of environment. And so at the time, my environment is what shaped me to really reinforce that behavior that I had been executing for 30 plus years of my life, until I was at a point, at a breaking point of like, there must be something else. And so, truthfully, it started with Google, right? Like, because there had no other resources at the time. And one thing led to another of this. There must be a different way outside of my training in clinical psychology, outside of my medical training, which you would think, right? There would be a lot of
Well,
answers there.
let's
And
dissect it a little bit, because I had that same moment too, and maybe we can each talk about the ways that it happened for ourselves. But um, there has to be an element of curiosity. I know for myself, I had seen other ways that people had lived what we thought were successful lives, right? I mean, for me, it was my moment was a failed marriage. And I had a model of my own parents that were married for 61 years before my mom passed away. And I had that as my model. And sitting there in my ditch going, how is it after 6, 7 years of marriage, I found myself in this ditch where I'm divorced with 2 kids. And I know there's a lot of successful marriages out there. Uh, what happened? Where did it go wrong? I got curious, right? That there's got to be a different way of doing things to get that success. And what do I need to take ownership of in this problem? And can I identify those things that I need to take ownership of and then figure out a different path for myself from a self leadership perspective to get myself out of this ditch and on a better path? Would you say kind of the same boat for you? You found yourself depressed, can't get out of bed, but you had some curiosity still there going, just like you said, right? There's that decision point. Either you stay where you are or you do something different, and you got some curiosity and got on the Google and started trying to learn or figure out there's got to be a different path because I know there are happy people out in life, right?
Yeah, the self-ownership is so
Right.
powerful, right? Often when we're feeling depleted or depressed, what happens is that we lose hope. And sometimes that's because we feel like there's nothing that we can do. And sometimes that can mean not only looking externally for that validation, but also sort of giving away our power, right? And part of taking that power back is actually owning all the things that we've been
Mm-hmm.
doing, how we've been living up until the point that
Right.
led us there, right? Because at any moment that we're blaming anyone else outside of ourselves, we're also giving away our power to that
Mm-hmm.
person or that experience or that industry, because when we're blaming, then we're not focusing on things that we can control. And when we focus on what we can control, what's within our control, which is our mindset, how we're approaching things, our perception of things, and our response and how we're choosing to live our life, who we are, that's what causes the deep fundamental transformation that is so powerful, that I experienced personally and that I love to help my clients with now, because this is what gets to the core. This is what gets to the root of so many challenges, right? And that manifests on a mental, emotional, and
Mm-hmm.
also physical plane. That once you get to this root and you can make those shifts there, everything unfolds seemingly magically. And yet at the same time, it's very clear why, because we're getting to the root of things that sometimes, even in medicine or certain industries, there can be a more reactive slapping on the band-aid kind of treatment model, which can be helpful in certain circumstances. And part of why I left conventional medicine is because I realized how powerful some of this other work was, that brings together the mind, body, spirit, gets to the root cause level so that we actually make transformation. And I was my first
Mm-hmm.
client, essentially, right? Because I had to heal and learn the hard way at what not to do. And then on top of that, how to help myself out there without medications, without procedures, even as a doctor myself, how to help myself get out there to learn the skills, the mindset, the resources, the tools at my disposal that I hadn't even been exposed to, even though I'm a doctor and I have a degree in clinical
Yeah.
psychology.
So you're sitting now in a spot where you were before you found yourself in a ditch. You were a leader. Now you're a leader again today. What is your confidence level like? What does your viewpoint look like, and so forth? Being a leader today, you know, I can't go on social media anymore these days without going, here's me at 2002 and here's me at 2022, kind of pictures. So let's use that framework with you now. Your kind of your before and after look as a leader, having gone through this. fire, so to speak, and getting curious about things and taking ownership and therefore keeping the power, as you say, for yourself. What does leadership look like for you now, both in the mind and in the heart, versus what it was back before you found yourself in the ditch?
Mm, beautiful question. Thank you.
Because that's the importance. That's what we're
It's
talking about here, right? Is in order to know and be more confident as a leader of others, to have been a leader of yourself. That's where the confidence comes from.
that's where when we lead ourselves from a resource state, not from a survival, fight or flight state, which we can talk about physiologically,
Mm-hmm.
why there's a big difference there. When we lead ourselves from that resource state, we're so much more empowered, we're so much more grounded in who we are, so much more aligned, can make decisions much more congruently, and also more powerfully impact the people
Right.
around us, right? Because my mind, true leadership is actually fostering and guiding other leaders, not creating followers.
Well,
The best form of leadership,
I
go
always
ahead.
say, and I've said on this podcast, the number one job of a leader is to build other leaders. And people kind of look
Exactly.
at me
Yeah.
funny when I say that, and they go, "No, not leaders by a title or a level of authority. I'm talking about self leadership. Number one job of a leader is to help others be self leaders who then turn around and may not even
Yes.
take a leadership role and have that title and authority within an organization, but they're able to lead a more congruent life, you know, life with integrity to who they are and who are they born to be, and can make a bigger impact in the world."
Yeah, leadership has nothing to do
No,
with your title. In fact, the people with the title are not necessarily the
no.
best leaders. And I've seen that
Uh-huh.
firsthand. I mean, I was a medical director in the Bronx during the pandemic, right? And this was after
Mm-hmm.
my transformation. And of course, it's an ongoing
Right,
journey, continuing, right? As someone who's leading ourselves and leading other people, I feel like it's imperative for us to continue that self leadership process, that growth, that transformation in terms of our life journey. That also enhances our ability to show up as more powerful and inspired and inspiring leaders, right? And I saw that firsthand, especially in the crisis during COVID-19 and working on the front lines as a medical director, which in terms of the corporate world, in some ways essentially was like middle
mm-hmm.
management, right? Because there was leaders above me, and then also I'm managing on the ground level in terms of the
Right.
clinics that I was running. And so to see the tendency in terms of top down leadership versus this is what you're supposed to do, this is how you do it, versus what I had discovered for myself from leading myself, the power of inspiring and empowering other people to step into
Mm-hmm.
their power, that then creates that powerful leadership from within as opposed to being enforced from without followers, right? People that are just executing without thinking for themselves. Entirely different scenario. And so the beauty was that I was able to use some of the skills that I learned from myself to heal myself, to lead myself first in this very unique, unusual situation where we were in a crisis during the pandemic to help people on the front lines within the structure, with what the structure allowed. And so now, in terms of the leadership, now, in terms of leading other people and clients and organizations that I work all over the world, right? It's about, for me, it's about sparking that light inside each individual person. We each have unique light, unique
Mm-hmm.
value, unique gifts. And so often when we are so conditioned and programmed even to muffle that and behind other expectations, uh, rules, standards, whatever it may be, this light sometimes dims, sometimes
Mhm.
even goes out completely. And we lose sight of this unique value, right? This podcast is called Generate Your Value. Our unique value as individual beings is within ourselves. And the answers are all within ourselves. And if anybody tells us that we should or are supposed to, then to me, that often is a red flag, at least for us to be aware of, because if we use that to override the truth inside ourselves, right? Which is what I talked about in the TEDx talk that I gave. The message there is live your truth and
Mhm.
trust your intuition, because the message that we typically get is to forgo all of that because there's no evidence, there's not enough data. So therefore, logic, reason, expert opinion. And I can tell you thousands of stories of my own, of my coaching clients, all these different people that will defy the odds in terms of all of these things versus the intuition where the truth was coming through, right? And so part of it is, can we inspire and empower people to really step into their truth? And from there, we can share our unique gifts and shine our unique light, and then have an even more powerful impact on the world than if we're conforming to what already has been done, what we're told we're supposed to do, right? How are we supposed to create? How are we to create any sort of change or innovation or disruption and make the world better or transform the world in any way if we are following what's already known, right? And following things as to how they're already been done, right? And things are in place for a reason. And yet at the same time, I think the power of true leadership is, how can you inspire the people that you are leading in a way
Mhm.
that lights them up, that then allows them to share their unique gifts and then uniquely contribute to whatever it
Mhm.
is that you're working on in a way that's so much much more powerful than if we try to keep people in any box of any sort.
Yep. Hate to use the phrase "you're preaching to the choir," but that's that's exactly what this podcast is about: is to try to help people to understand that leadership is about inspiration and influence, and it's about getting the best out of your people, which is the essence of love versus the essence of fear. When you say you shall do this and you shall do that, sitting in that chair and do these processes and these tasks and do it in such a manner that you're coming more from a place of fear. I mean, love and fear is not black and white. There's grayness in between, but it's more driving from a place of fear to say, if you don't do it this way, then you're out the door, right? And all the creativity and all of the innovation, all the growth is going to come from me because I'm the important one here. You just sit down in your chair, do as you're told, and you'll get a paycheck, kind of mentality. And if you can come more from a place of innovation and creativity and inspiration and getting the best out of your people, you're going to get, and I understand there's a lot, not a lack, but a decrease in the sense of control of the situation by doing that. And trust and faith has to become a bigger part of your leadership style to do that. I get it. Been there, got the T-shirt. But you're going to get a better outcome, and that's the important thing. Is here is that you as a leader are going to get first and foremost judged by your results. And I used to guide my mentees in Boeing and say, don't be afraid to hire smarter people than yourself on your team. From a fear perspective, that's going
Well,
to
an
scare you. But
analogy.
from a love perspective, you want that because your number one thing you're going to be judged on is the results that your team produces for the strategy of the organization.
Yeah, a great question that is helpful for us to ask
Mm-hmm.
ourselves as leaders, especially when we're leading people, right? Is, are we coming from a place of scarcity and fear and
Mm-hmm.
wanting to control, versus are we coming from a place of possibility and abundance and creation? An analogy that I like to use that
Yep.
can be helpful, right? is that if we have a water hose and there's water running through it, often the more we care about something, the more high stakes something is, right? The more likely we're wanting to grip tighter and tighter and tighter because we want it to go
Mm-hmm.
well. We care so much and it's
Mm-hmm.
so important to us. And yet, ironically, counterintuitively, right, our nature is to grip on tighter. But what happens to the flow through that water hose
Mm-hmm.
as we grip tighter and tighter? Right? And you may even grip so hard that you
Yep.
cut it off, right? And sometimes as leaders, one of the highest challenges that we can have as leaders, especially leaders that wanting to make an impact in the world, right, is that we care so much from a good place and then we cut off the flow. And especially if we're doing this with the people on our team that we're leading, then we're disconnecting them from the creativity, from even their flow state, because we're also transferring that fear state, that survival state into them as well. And where they're operating from is not resource then, because there's a whole phenomenon in terms of what happens in your brain when you're in any level of stress or fight or flight called the amygdala hijacked. And literally you cannot think clearly and think rationally. And so what we're doing when we do this is we're not only cutting people off in terms of their creativity and what they can uniquely contribute, even beyond what we can imagine, but we're also putting them in a resource, not in a resource state, so that the quality of what they're producing is not necessarily at the level
Mm-hmm.
that it could be. And so
Even though
that's
there's
the
good or
one
well
of the
intentions
biggest.
in it, right? We really care about this subject, so
Yeah. And the more we care, the
yeah.
tighter we hold on. And ironically, the more we actually let go. Not from a care, not from a place of detachment, but let go, non-attached, meaning that we can letting go is more allowing,
Letting go of
right?
the
When we can
path,
be so clear,
right? Not of the
yes, letting go of
destination
the
or what
how.
we're trying to get to and the reasons why we want to get to that destination, but letting go of the path.
Yes, being so
Mm-hmm.
clear on the vision, our vision and why, our mission and our purpose, right? And then letting go. Anybody who is a business leader knows, and even just in general in life, like when we let go of the how and we are able to pivot, right? One of the greatest skills of that are most powerful skills, I think, for any leader is the ability to be able to adapt and pivot, right? And that's what allows us to then be more successful. If we're so hell bent on one specific path, the likelihood for success is incredibly low. And so that's also that allowing, that letting go of that control that actually counterintuitively gives us more possibility, more options, and more likelihood and probability of success.
Yeah, so let's go back to the beginning of our conversation,
Sure.
right? If we're at point A and we're trying to get to point B, and we decide to get from point A to point B is a straight line, okay? But to go on that straight line means we have to climb over a bunch of mountains and so forth, and we got to point B, but we got there, and our state is the state that you were at, that you were in a ditch, you were so depressed, and you couldn't get out of bed, right? Versus a different path. And maybe it was more of a learning path. Maybe it took you more time to get there or cost you a little bit more money, but you were able to get to the same spot. But your state of being when you got there, because of maybe lessons that you learned along the way, that you were not depressed, you could get out of bed in the morning. It may have taken you a little bit longer to get there, but your path was different. I think that gets lost on people, right?
Mm.
It's not that you reached the destination, it's a lot of times about the path you took and your state of being when you reached it, right? It's a
It's the
journey, right?
journey.
How
Yeah.
many millionaires and billionaires are out there? They got all kinds of money in the bank and three Lamborghinis in the garage and three residences spread around the world, and they made it. They got to point B, but then there's no joy or happiness, right? There's no sense of joy out of it because they were so focused on the do and that shortest path and running over
Well,
people to make all that money and have all these things, but they're empty inside because of it, as opposed to maybe going a different path where they still got the three Lamborghinis and everything else, but they have a great state of being because of the way that they did it, and they had self love, and they went through the internal um, journey that led them on a different path. Maybe it took a longer time. Maybe it took them 3 or 5 years longer than that goal that they had. But they got there and have a better state of being once they got
yeah, that's so
there. Mm-hmm.
important distinction in terms of so many of us are actually more human doings than human
Mm-hmm.
beings. And that's how we put celebrities and people who seem to have it all. And then all of a sudden we turn around and we don't understand why they committed suicide because they must have
Mm-hmm.
it all, right? And they must be so happy when actually that's what happens when we do in order to be. When we're taking actions thinking that that is what's going to lead us to happiness, we're doing and we're achieving, we're doing all these things externally to achieve that ultimately deep down because we're wanting to be a certain way. And the power of the work that I do now with my coaching clients and organizations and stuff, self leadership is an inside out job. The most powerful leadership in general. If you want to be lead yourself, lead your kids, lead your team, lead your business, whatever it may be, right? The most effective way is actually
Mm-hmm.
from the inside out. So when we be first, when we take care of this first, and then the doing comes from the being, then everything changes. That's a completely different ball game we're playing. And I've seen it over and over and over again with highly
Mm-hmm.
successful people and leaders and business owners that I've worked with. When we make that shift internally, and sometimes it's conscious strategies and tasks that I give them, but often it's unconscious work that
Yep.
takes them deeper, right? And takes them into shifting some of these deeply ingrained beliefs, uh, programming, even traumas and hurts and wounds from childhood, often. That once we shift that, and then the being is solid, aligned, and congruent, and we heal that, and we love ourselves, and we care for ourselves, and even
Mm-hmm.
forgive ourselves, and accept ourselves fully. Then from there, the doing, when we do from that place, everything becomes so much easier. All of a sudden they're like, oh my God, I can't believe it. All these opportunities are coming. Suddenly everything's easier. I feel better and I'm getting better results than I ever could have imagined. How did I not
Right.
learn this before? Right. And we don't know what we don't know. So we don't know it until we've experienced it, or someone opens our eyes to this possibility, which is part of the point of why we're even on this podcast together, to be able to share some of these ideas with people, right? Because we're not taught that growing up and even as adults. And it's so important for us to nurture this inner state first. And there's so many nuances and details in terms of how to do so, so that when we're be first, then the doing, it doesn't, it's, there's so much more ease, so much less effort, and so much better results,
Mm-hmm.
even better than you can imagine. And I can tell you thousands of stories as evidence to show you,
Yeah.
right? To prove it. And it's just a beautiful place to be, to operate from.
Well, let me ask you this question. Totally agree with everything you said, and I've got stories to tell too.
Yeah.
What do you feel about the state? In aviation speak, I'm going to come at you at the 100,000 foot level. Um, Speaking like an air traffic controller. What do you feel like is the state of doing in today's world in the state of being? Given everything that's going on in the world, to include what's going on with technology, what, where do you, if we were to consider the two like yin and yang, sort of,
Hmm.
what would you say is, in your opinion, going on in the state of doing, in the state of being in the world? And I ask you that question because a couple weeks ago, I had an episode come out with this panel discussion where that was my impetus for putting the panel together. Is this question? And being it you weren't on the panel, I'd still like to get your viewpoint as well. Where do we think we are with these things in the world today?
Well, what I've seen is that often, whenever there's a dichotomy
Hmm.
or any polarity, when there's separation, love and hate, peace and war, whatever it is, that actually is what creates more conflict and more turmoil and more suffering. And so, between being and doing, what often happens in terms of how it shows up in our day to day life, and especially with people who are high achievers and successful and leaders that I work with, we feel like there's a conflict, it's an either or situation. Either I'm doing,
Hmm.
right, or I'm being. And when we think that it's an either or situation, that disconnects us from the harmony when they're
Hmm.
both integrated. And so that's the premise of a lot of the work that I do now, where it's not either or. It's actually how do you bring the strengths of both, and actually, first and foremost, on a conscious and unconscious level, recognize that they're part of the same spectrum, just like love and hate are part of the same spectrum. And can you elevate to being a conscious
Hmm.
being with choice, where then you're able to flow in any given moment anywhere along this spectrum? And that's what I see and I notice with working with super successful people. The disconnect and the missing piece is often in our behavior. We're not in our day to day, we don't recognize and even realize that this is all a spectrum, and that being and doing can then come in harmony. And it's when we integrate it and harmonize the two and notice that the more we be, the better the doing is. And also, the doing can allow better being, and that flow and harmony, that natural ebb and flow that happens in nature. And we see it all over in nature, that's actually the truth of reality. And that takes some work to get there at times because we're used to operating from this place. And so, even a simple day to day example, we can think that, well, we're either working hard and pushing hard or we're doing nothing, right? And like the doing versus the being, or we don't, there's a conflict in terms of understanding how these could come together. So we feel like we have to pick and choose in any given moment. And when we don't realize that there's harmony between the two, that's when there's a disservice and we can feel like we're being pulled in different directions.
Totally agree with everything you said. I would say in that element of choice, uh, we need to understand the concept that it's integrated and it ebbs and flows between the two. But in that state of choice, we also have to understand to choose which one we need to lead the, the given phase of our life or season of our life in to get us through the season or to the next step. Sometimes do needs to take the lead, and sometimes B needs to take the lead. And you can look at that at a daily level, you can look at that at a weekly level, or you can look at that as at a yearly or even a decade level. When you're looking at a season of life. But first is to get that concept together that it's integrated. It's not an or, like you beautifully said, but it's integrated. But there are times when to lead one or the other. And go
Well,
ahead.
oh, Well, even, and it just occurred to me because sometimes we're talking on a really high level, you and I, and for those who may not have experienced it, it kind of maybe is too theoretical. And the idea that the thought that comes to mind, an example I'm sure all of us can relate to, is have you ever noticed the difference between when you're clear and you're in a resource state, and let's say you're even
Mm-hmm.
in a flow state, right? What allows the flow state that we talk about in peak performance at all? It's actually the being, that presence, that the state first, then everything, all of a sudden, something that you could have been working on for hours, for days, or struggling to figure out, all of a sudden it flows out of you, and it completed quicker, more easily, more effectively, and higher quality than ever before. Right. And I'm sure many of us have experienced that, versus when we're trying to force it or make it happen, or I'm supposed to do this, and all of a sudden you're going hours and days and weeks, and you still haven't gotten any more clarity on this project that you're working
Mm-hmm.
on, and you're not making any progress. Right. This is one, let's say, real life example that can demonstrate the difference between if you're doing just for the sake of doing versus if you are truly, even just for a moment, pausing enough to shift the being state so that it impacts the doing, and you're able to do so much better, so much quicker, and so much with so much more ease
Mm-hmm.
than ever before. And that's the power of what we're talking about here, to give people a real life example that they may be able to relate to.
Yeah, that the premise, I believe, that the way I would answer the question I asked you, and the reason why I did that, the panel discussion, was that I believe with AI coming on board and things that are happening in technology wise, that we're kind of coming out of a, once again, looking at the 100,000 foot level, we're kind of coming out of an era of do in the business world. Starting with Henry Ford and the assembly line and the Model T, in trying to get scale out of a business. How do I make a lot of money with a car? Well, I have to learn how to mass produce it to sell it to a lot of people, so a lot of money comes into the company and I get rich, right? Kind of started with that way of doing business that we've had 50, 60, 70, how many years it's been, of do in this
Mm.
scalability. And it's required, at first, a lot of human power and some machine power. And as time went on in this era of do, it was more machine, human being kind of guiding machine. And now we reached a stage of technology being that, well, now machines can kind of think about these low level logical things on their own. And therefore, we're getting to a criticality point of, or will shortly, about the human beings and being able to make a wage to earn the money to be able to put a roof over our head, food on the table, have children, you know, the American way of life. So I think it's got to kind of force the issue on humanity that we need to lead with the B, because that's where the creativity comes from. And the value of being a human being versus a machine with some simple logical learning skills can do things. That's where humans can start playing in the business world and still make those wages and still have the economy and the GDP and the strength as a country and so forth that all the politicians talk about can still exist. We as human beings need to start doing more and more of this integral work to be, as you say, in the state of flow and in the state of creativity, in the state of being, to lead this be do integration and dynamic, such that we can continue humanity on in this world that we've created in a way that it works with
Mhm.
the greenback being the way that we can keep us physically going. as humanity.
And I know some people listening, it's sometimes it can be hard to stomach or even some skepticism that comes in. And I will say from my personal experience, right? You and I both actually, Andy, right? Very left brain, very science based, very
Very do.
practical. My whole, yes, very do my entire life. And I
Hmm.
achieved very highly, right, from
Me
that
too.
paradigm. And what I'm saying, and what you and I are both saying and sharing here to even open up that seed of possibility within the viewers, within you, right? Is that for me, and Andy, you're welcome to share once if that was the same for you. For me, let's say this is what I was able to achieve in terms of my level of success as I define it, but even my inner experience and what's happening and what's possible for me here. These are the results that I got from doing and achieving from this whole
Mm.
high achieving, checking off the box opposed to paradigm. And it was very high based on most people's standards, right? One of the youngest medical directors, early to
Yep.
medical school, all of these things. So most people's standards, doing great. And once I made this shift, right? And with a lot of inner work, that's not easy or comfortable, but a lot of shifts within me to get myself out of that
Hmm.
ditch, as you call it, right? The state to really heal from within here and address things from within here, taking full ownership, finally learning to lead myself in a way that I never learned in medical school or otherwise. Then that's now all of a sudden, whew, like the lid is off in terms of possibilities and the things that have been possible and the results that have been created as a result of shifting into this. So just to put it out there that if you haven't experienced it, it's hard to maybe fathom, right? And that this is a new paradigm. It's a new ball game altogether. And just to give you an idea of what can be possible, because everything that's unfolded since that has shifted for me, and I've done that inner work, has been you might call a miracle or totally improbable and impossible, and yet it's happening and unfolding. And not only that, and even more importantly, I'm so much more aligned, so much more clear, so much more congruent in terms of who I am and my truth, that I feel so much more fulfilled no
Mm.
matter what is going on with it outside of me. And on top of that, able to handle and navigate anything that comes up, no matter what it is, now that this is solid inside, right? So it doesn't matter what comes up, what challenges, right? Life is full of change. That's one of the things, the only things that is certain is that life will bring change. And the quality of our life, as Tony Robbins says, the quality of our life is directly proportional to the amount of uncertainty that we are comfortable with. So, especially as leaders and especially as business leaders, especially in a time when there's a lot of turmoil in the world, when there's markets changing and all these things, the greater we're able to be solid and aligned and congruent internally and grounded no matter what, then the better we can handle and navigate any situation that comes up to us. And for me, that
Mm.
is true leadership, the ability to navigate and pivot and adapt from a resource state to lead and empower other people, especially when times
Mm.
are stressful or challenging.
Yeah, you're kind of talking about the state of joy, right? We all, what do you want to be like? I just want to be happy. Well, you don't have that understanding that happiness is flowing. Happiness is a finite state. I could sit down and have a really nice Italian dinner and I'm happy, but the next day it's all gone away, right? Whereas having a state of joy, to reach a state of joy means that you've done that internal work, just like you elegantly just stated, right? All that aspect is that I can be at a state of joy, which is ever flowing, and I can handle anything that's thrown at me from a self leadership perspective because of that work that I've done to reach that state of joy. Because I know what's important in life. And it's not
Yeah.
what's in your bank account.
And you know what? No, not at all. And you know what I found in terms of the clients I've worked with that are successful business owners, leaders, all these things, we think we want to be joyful or happy all the time, and that the opposite of like, but that's not
Mm-hmm.
actually reality of the state of things, right? And often what people are searching for more than that, because happiness, joy,
Mm-hmm.
emotions fluctuate depending on what's going on. That's natural being a human.
Yep.
It's peace. And it's when we do this inner work, when we feel truly alive, when we live your truth, like I shared in the TEDx talk, that's when we have
Mm-hmm.
this level of inner peace, when we know and we trust and have enough certainty within ourselves, regardless of how much uncertainty there is outside of ourselves, no matter what is going on. That's when we can have this level of inner peace that allows us not only to be more resourced
Mm-hmm.
in any given situation, but allows us to navigate more skillfully and more masterfully so that we can overcome and move through any challenge in a much more powerful way with much better results and closer to better than
Mm-hmm.
we ever could have imagined before.
Yeah, for me, I think peace is a direct result of truly knowing, I mean, deeply knowing yourself.
Yeah. To be aware
Mm-hmm.
of it in the first place, which some of us are not because we're so used to measuring ourselves by these external expectations or guidelines or standards. To be aware is the first step. And then the second step is
Mm-hmm.
acceptance. Can we actually accept ourselves for who we truly are, all
All
the parts of
parts.
ourselves? Yeah. And even forgive ourselves and give ourselves full permission to
Mm-hmm.
be who we truly are, as opposed to putting on any mask that we think we need to in order to be a certain way for other people. But then that disconnects us from our truth and our light and our power and our unique value. The unique value that only us, only you can provide to the world. And you cannot provide that value or share that value unless you step fully into your light and your power,
Mm-hmm.
accept yourself fully, and also give yourself permission to do so, no matter all the evidence to the contrary, or no matter what anyone else is saying, anyone else's opinions or expectations of
Yeah, it goes right back to your comment of you don't know what you don't know.
you. Mm-hmm.
And in my business coaching, that's what I go after with my clients from a business perspective is you get much more than that 3% bump in revenue when you go after what you don't know. And then
Mm-hmm.
the hurdle I have to go over is to show the client that what we're really talking about is what we don't know. What you don't know that you don't know about yourself is where we have to go first before we can go after the business. And that's what scares off most people.
Yeah. It's not easy
Nope.
and it's not comfortable, and yet I will tell you, it is so worth it. And I'm sure you
Mm-hmm.
will say the same, Andy, in terms of this work. It's
So worth it.
so worth it. Experience it. It's
Because
the
you're not going to
one.
find the peace that you talked about until you do it.
Hmm.
Well, I'm looking at the clock on the wall, and I mean, I could go on hours and hours over, particularly a couple bottles of wine with you on this topic, but unfortunately, we got to bring it to a close. So, if people wanted to learn more about you as a person, you as your business, what you do, the impact that you make in the world, what's the best way they can reach out to you?
So I, Lisa Yeung, MD, and you can see that on the screen there. The last name is Yeung. So Lisa Yeung, MD, on Instagram, on LinkedIn, on YouTube. And I invite people to connect with me because this is my passion and
Hmm.
this is my purpose, right? And that's why I shared what I did very vulnerably and openly on the TEDx stage. And I invite people to watch that, to inspire them and share with me. Send me a message about how that impacts you or what you thought about what comes up for you based on this conversation that Andy and I have had, because we're doing this because we see and believe it, and we want to help other people to see and believe it. And so I invite people to connect with me and follow me, and even more importantly, send me a message to see how it's impacted you, or ask me any questions, because I wish when I was in that place, and that rock bottom, that I
Mm-hmm.
had resources to go to. And so I'm a resource for everyone out there, and anyone out there that wants to learn more, or is curious, or maybe has a certain reaction to things that we said, because we're all here in it to
Yep.
help each other, right?
Yep.
That's why we're
Because we're all
doing it.
interconnected, and that's part of that what you don't know thing. All right, I forewarned you. Here comes that last question we ask of every guest here on the Generate Your Value podcast. And Dr. Lisa Yeung, that question is, what do the words generate your value mean to you?
Well, we talked about in terms of that spark inside of ourselves, right? In order to generate any value, and especially in order to generate our most authentic value and our unique truth and share our unique gifts, we first have to light that spark, that unique light that is
Mm-hmm.
in within us, of who we truly are, the essence of who we are, with our unique skills, our unique experiences, our unique expertise, and the unique being that is within us. Then we can generate value that impacts the rest of the world. And so it goes back to everything that we talked about in terms of how can we really tune in to who we truly are, to the truth inside of us, and get guidance and support when needed, so that that flame, that light is as bright as it possibly can. And that is what will generate the most value, more than doing anything else in terms of conforming to
Mm-hmm.
what other people expect.
Yeah, I believe the universe is intentional. One of my favorite words in the English language is intentional, right? So there was intentionality behind the creation of you in this world. But the maximum value that you can deliver is proportional to how much you understand the intentionality behind that act by the universe and what the universe created you to be. We don't come with an owner's manual,
Yeah.
right?
No.
This journey as a human being on Earth is about writing your owner's manual and going deep inside of yourself and understanding the intentionality behind the universe.
Well, and who we are. How many of us actually pause long enough in our busy days to actually reflect on who we are and who we want to be, as opposed to what we
And
want to
your
do?
intuition will tell you that.
And
But you got to be quiet and be, because it doesn't have a megaphone. Your intuition doesn't have a megaphone that
oh no, it
whispers.
whispers.
So are you being quiet enough every single day, or have periods of quiet to tune into the intuition and let it be a guiding force in your life?
Hmm.
All right. We're here every Tuesday with a great guest like Dr. Lisa to talk on elements of self leadership, success, do and be. A lot of these keywords that you saw, all these golden nuggets that have been thrown around between the two of us today, that you can use in your life and in your business to find that state of peace, that state of joy um, in your life. So hit that subscribe button. Come back and hear what other guests have to say, what their life story is, and how they used self leadership skills to get to where they are today. I guarantee you, they may have been going on that straight line for a while, like Dr. Lisa did, but had to take a pause and figure things out and start doing a curlicue and all kinds of stuff to get to where she is today, to be at a much better state of being in her life compared to where she was earlier in her life journey. So, that being said, have a great day. Have a great week. We'll see you here next time on the Generate Your Value podcast. Take care. Thank you so much for joining us today on this episode of the Generate Your Value podcast. If you find our conversations to be useful in your life, I invite you to subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss an episode.
You can find me online at Instagram at _Zach.Levy, Facebook, and LinkedIn.
For information on my coaching services, visit my website at www.generateyourvalue.com. You can also find me and my company on LinkedIn, Facebook, X, and Instagram. Simply search for Generate Your Value on those platforms.
Once again, thanks for joining us for today's podcast, and we invite you to generate your value in this world.